It starts with my being at my mother's bedside about 11 and a half years ago. She was dying, and I had the blessing of being able to be with her in her last days when she was totally conscious. And in that experience, we were perhaps closer and sharing more mother-daughter talk than we ever really had in our lives. And while we were spending the time together, we, of course, had the ubiquitous TV on in the hospital room. But it was a very auspicious day because Justice Sonia Sotomayor was in her confirmation hearing to become a Supreme Court justice. And we listened to her, and my mother said how excited she was and how proud she was that women were finally in these positions of respect and influence where they should be, and that it would mean that abortion would be able to remain safe and legal. And I was shocked. So the story goes back to 1975 when it was not a good discussion with my mother. I had a few days earlier received abortion services, had an abortion in New York City where I was a second-year law student. I was with a partner at that time who I care very deeply about, but really did not believe was going to be my life partner. I also knew that having a child at that point in my life, at that point in my studies and my age, was not in anybody's best interest. It was not something that I had chosen to do. So instead, I was able to exercise another choice. They gave me discharge instructions like you get anytime you get a health care procedure. And I tucked them away in my suitcase because I was leaving the next day to go back to Chicago because it was semester break. I should have known better and remembered that my mother had very poor boundaries for privacy. And so when I brought that suitcase home and was not in the room with it, my mother decided to go on a little scavenger hunt just to see what she could find out about my life all the way in New York City. And what she came upon was my discharge instructions. And that is how my mother found out that I had an abortion. And she went nuts. She was almost hysterical, I would say, screaming at me, calling me a slut, denouncing me, and condemning me in every way. We just stopped talking to one another. She denounced me. And from 1975 to when I was with my mother 11 and a half years ago, we never spoke about my abortion again. Now I'm in the hospital room. And as I said, I was shocked when my mother said that she was relieved about abortion being kept safe because we were going to have a new justice on the Supreme Court. And when I explained to her that I had no idea that she supported abortion, she told me her story of terror. When she was a little girl, her mother became pregnant with her fifth child. Her mother, whose name was Clara, my namesake, already had 5 children. They were a poor immigrant family. My grandpa, who I loved very much, I don't think was the best of husbands and was a gruff, hardworking, laboring immigrant himself. And my grandmother's mental health and the family's well-being simply could not sustain with another child. So she decided she was going to have to get an abortion. And of course, there was no access to one, unless a safe one, unless you had money, which they did not. She came back from the abortion, and I'm sure it was in the worst of circumstances, and began hemorrhaging in her home, in her little apartment in Chicago, screaming in pain, howling in pain, according to my mother, and bleeding profusely. And my mother was all of 9 years old when this was going on. There was nobody else home but my mother, my grandmother, and my father, my grandfather. My grandfather, this big burly man, couldn't take it, and he fled. He fled the apartment while my mother had to be the one to watch my grandmother likely bleed to death. Fortunately, she did not. She lived. But that trauma for my mother was so deep and so real that when she came upon my discharge instructions and realized that I had an abortion, all that terror of long ago came up, and she became terrorized on my behalf. And that was a reason in large part for her extreme reaction, because she remembered the bad old days and saw that happening for her daughter. While we sat there and lived through that experience together of little Miriam, thinking her mother was going to die, and then being able to see on the other side, the strong justice and the Supreme Court at that time that was going to uphold Roe v. Wade. My mother said to me that she hoped into the future that abortion would continue to be legal and that I would be on the front lines of making sure that would happen. All these years later, I have 2 wonderful sons. When I made that choice, it was at the right time. And as of 2 weeks ago, I've become a bubby. So none of that would have happened. None of that would have happened if I had to go to a back alley abortionist. And I look at the life path that I might have taken and the life path that might have been forced on me, and makes me ever more committed to use public platforms as I can, like this today, to speak out on behalf of abortion rights.